Come on.
They're right there!
Let's go. Move, 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 move. This episode of Choices Not Chances podcast is sponsored by Louisiana Gun Shop, located on Highway 90 West in Broussard, Louisiana, just south of Lafayette. For more information, stay tuned at the end of this episode. This is Choices Not Chances podcast with Ryan and Matt. I'm your co-host, Matthew Charette. Sitting next to me is Ryan Rogers. Ryan.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back out to Choices Not Chances. And just like every other episode, we ask that if there's something that you take away from this episode that needs to be shared out, you know that it needs to be shared out. Don't be selfish with the information. Today our guest is Ken Sample. We have a mutual friend and his future son-in-law, Tom, and we met at a recent venue that was held by our VFW, and you know, some guys came out. We had some different trainers going on and different events and things like that going out at the VFW, and I ran into Ken. And Ken struck me as a pretty interesting guy. He needs to come on the show, in my opinion, because I've never talked to somebody that was in Ken's shoes to date, and today we're going to have that conversation. Ken spent a lot of his time in the service and a lot of service to the country by way of being a surgeon. And he started out, just like all of us do, and we're going to kind of get to the beginning of that to find out how we got to the end. So Ken, thanks for coming out to the show. I appreciate you being on. And I've been looking forward to this conversation. I know that we talked offline. We had it scheduled once already, and I had some physical things come down I had to take care of, and then and now we're kicking it today. So thanks for coming out to the show.
No, you're quite welcome.
All right. So basically, with my show, the way that I like to rock it is, in the beginning, I have just a few pointed questions about culturally, where did you come from? So I like to understand people's upbringings, their childhood years, their rearing. Where do you come from? Who do you come from?
So I am from Kentucky, a good old southern redneck. I'm the fourth of three kids, but I was really sort of an only child. My siblings are 10, 11, and 12 years older than me. So eventually I would meet a high school sweetheart is almost exactly 9 months older than me. So we like to say that God looked down and said, "Oh my gosh, we need somebody for Debbie." And they said, "Pete and Rosemary haven't had a kid for a while. I guess it's their turn." And so that's how I came about. But my mom and dad were both civil service. My dad was a mechanic. He worked at Fort Knox on tanks. I always thought that was kind of fun. And my mom worked at the Social Security Administration, and they were determined that all of us went to college, which we did. Neither one of them had managed that. My dad was a World War II veteran and loved the Navy. He stayed in the reserves and ultimately retired from the reserves. And he always was always wanting one of us to go in the military. And so I grew up kind of thinking I wanted to be in the Navy. And then in high school, I wore glasses growing up, and I actually had a recruiter that pretty much told me there wasn't much of a future for me in the Navy wearing glasses. So I kind of gave up with that, and I didn't know what I was going to do. My wife said, "I always wanted to marry a doctor. Why don't you be a doctor?" So that's what I decided to do. I didn't tell the interviewers when I went to med school that was why I wanted to be a doctor. But that was pretty much it. But so anyway, so I'd given up on the military. And literally the day after I received my acceptance to medical school, my wife and I were walking across the quad at our college, walked through the student center, and there's a Navy recruiter there. And I didn't even stop to give him time of day or anything. We were just walking by, and he said, "Hey there, what are you doing?" or something to that effect. Basically, he said, "What year are you?" I said, "I'm a senior graduating." He said, "Well, do you know what you're going to do next year?" And I was all puffed up and proud of myself. And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to go to medical school." And he said, "Have I got a deal for you?" Mm-hmm. And so basically the military scholarship, Navy scholarship, would pay for medical school and all of that. And so we talked it over, and so that's what I did. And so I got into the scholarship program, went to med school, and started out in the Navy on active duty in 1984.
Check. Now, going back just a little bit, did you play sports in school coming up?
I was never a high school athlete. I played little league baseball, and I like to play playground sports. But in those days, there wasn't a lot of organized sports like there are today. And little league, there was not any. I liked playing playground football, but there was no, organized leagues for football in those days. No Pee Wee football. So baseball, I never particularly cared for basketball for some reason. But so I didn't really play a lot of organized sports. Tracking.
And so you said you're almost like an only child because of how much older your other siblings were. So they were already kind of up and out of the house by the time you come into high school.
By the time I was old enough to remember things, 4 or 5, my brother had actually started out to be a priest, so he was going to the seminary from basically the time I was born until about 7th or 8th grade. I guess he came back after he got out of the seminary, gave that up. And then my older of the 2 sisters, when I left the house, she was in college in town, but she got her own apartment when I was about 7 or so. So, and then my sister married when I was about 10, 12. So it was kind of, they were off doing their own things pretty much when I was growing up.
Gotcha. And you also said that education was highly preached in your home, but that neither one of your parents had managed to get that college education. Can you go into that a little deeper?
So both of my parents were. My dad was from Kansas. He was one of 12 kids and raised on a farm during the Depression. And his school, it was a public school, little small town school that went from 1st grade to 12th grade. So he was with the same 15 to 17 kids or so all through school. And he made a point of saying that he had there was another girl that he was competing against all throughout his school years, and they went back and forth over who was number 1 in the class. And I forget how it wound up, whether he was valedictorian or she was valedictorian, and vice versa. But anyway, so he was good in school, but the 1930s Kansas, you just didn't grow up to plan on going to college. And then my mom, she tried to go to college, but again, by that time her mom had died, and she was in a single parent household. And girls back then, it was not
more traditional roles,
but it wasn't a traditional thing. And so again, if I remember correctly, she managed to go to 1 year of college, but I'm not even sure about that. But it was not something that they could swing. And then World War II started, and she went to work, and that was that. She just kept on working. Yeah.
Where do you think the drive or the imperative nature of their kids all going to college comes from?
I think it was that generation, post-war. That's what everybody wanted their kids to go to college. And when you look back, that's that was the big time when everybody, did start sending kids to college. It was the American dream: go to college, make things better for your kids. I know for one of the things that for me, it was like from about late grade school on, it was like that was just the plan. There was like no doubt in anybody's mind, mine or parents or anything, that I would go to college. And part of it was when I told you I wanted to be in the Navy. It was always to be a naval officer, and I had to be go to college to be that for the most part. So that was part of it early on. And so, but it just I think both mom and dad they looked at their not going to college as a missed opportunity, and they were gonna make sure that their kids didn't miss that.
Check. Okay, so you run into this recruiter. You decide that, hey, that doesn't sound like a half bad idea, and it pays for some of this Navy scholarship's going to pay down,
Right.
so it's not going to burden or be burdensome as far as financially, and maybe that sounds like a good idea. And then again, there's the thought that we're really not in a wartime right now, so you.
Well, don't speak of that too quick, because remember that was the height of the Cold War. But that was spring of '80. Reagan was elected that fall, which was interesting. One of my classmates who was applying for, I think it was for the Army, but it was a military scholarship during the school year. He had all his paperwork filled out, and the night that Reagan won the presidency, he tore up his paper, because his papers, and he said he was convinced we were going to be in a war, and he wasn't going to go in if that was the case.
No, definitely a contentious time period, for sure.
And it was also, post-Vietnam, military wasn't very popular then either.
Right. Okay, so how does it work when you're going to do that? You go to college for a couple of years, and then you do your officer candidacy schools, or how's that work?
Also, in this case, for going to medical school, you get your bachelor's degree before you ever get accepted to medical school. And then for the scholarship program, you're accepted to a medical school before you can even apply. And so I'd already, like I said, I'd gotten accepted, and then just ran into this guy. So I had to apply. It was interesting because it was late in the year for the applications, and so the recruiter said, "Hey, if you're going to do this, you need to jump on it, because at any time we will expect to get the word that we're full and to not take any more applications." And so I called all of the people that I put down for references, and I got my physical real quick and did all of that stuff. And he said, the recruiter said, he got off my application faster than he remembered ever getting anybody's off. It was 2 weeks that it went on. And then when I got the acceptance, which was around March, first part of March, he said in the same batch of mail that they got the letter showing that I'd been accepted, that they also got word that they were not to take any more applications because they were full.
Oh man, you were one of the last ones then, huh?
I was one of the last ones. So anyway, then basically the scholarship at that time, and I think it's pretty much the same now, but in those days, the benefits were they paid all books and tuition, which U of L was a state school, so the Navy got a bargain with me. My tuition, I found out later, my tuition was around $4,000 or $5,000 a year, and some of the people that were in the same year group as me, their tuition at that time was going $20,000, $25,000 a year. So, the Navy got a bargain, but then they also gave you a monthly stipend, which in those days was about $500 a month. And a real benefit that I think they've done away with, and I don't know if it's come back or not. They've talked about it, but in those days, the med school counted for pay purposes. So that when I got out of med school and started, I got promoted to lieutenant 03 and was paid as a lieutenant over 4. Interestingly enough, that changed for people that came in 6 months later. It changed. So when I was an intern, I was getting paid as a lieutenant over 4, and some of my intern mates were getting paid as a lieutenant under 2. So that was an interesting change. And the other thing that I snuck in on was that med school counted for retirement pay for years only if you did 20. So you had to do your 20, but if you did 20, then the med school got tacked on to that. So that made a big difference.
Okay.
Down the road, in my case. And so, that was basically it. And then by going into, you were not guaranteed a military internship or residency, but if you got, because there wasn't as many spots as there were people coming coming out of med school.
Mm-hmm.
But if you did do a Navy internship or residency, then you got paid active duty pay, which at that time was almost 3 times as much as what I would have gotten paid as a civilian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So a lot of monetary benefits to it. And then the payback for it was year for year for each year of school. And then the time in training, like internship or residency, didn't count.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just kind of dead time. And then, you paid back after that.
Check. So where do you go first after you commission?
So I went to Portsmouth Naval Hospital as a surgery intern and did that for a year. And then in those days, most surgical specialties and most medical specialties, you wound up not being able to go straight through to residency and had to go out and do some time as a general medical officer for basically 1 to 4 years until you could get back into residency.
Check. And so what's that first year look like though as an intern? What kind of things are you doing at the hospital?
So I did our intern group year was broken into 13 4-week periods. And so we would rotate them amongst the different specialties. And I mean, if you look on pretty much any medical TV show about interns, we're the peons of the medical world. And so, that was in the good old days when we didn't have any kind of work restrictions or anything like that. So I would do anything from drawing blood to starting IVs to running down lab results or pushing a patient down to x-ray to get an x-ray. Most of the time I averaged about 120 hours a week.
Wow.
So, pretty much spent my time exhausted. We averaged about every third night on call. So unlike today where they do a night on call and then go home the next morning, we just then started our next day and started working. So it'd be 36 plus hours on. Mm-hmm. Got a taste of surgical subspecialties. I did a rotation in peds and a rotation in internal medicine and basically all the things to get you ready to practice general medicine. And
at this point, are you married to your high school sweetheart?
I was married. We were actually married in college.
Married in college, okay. And so how's she taking this transition into new military life?
So she still tells the story. She was so insulted. She got pregnant with our second child right after I started active duty. And she still tells the story of going in for her medical check and giving them a urine sample, and they wanted my social security number. And she wanted to give them hers, and they're like, no, we don't care about yours. We want his. And she thought that was so terrible that she was reduced to my number. But
tied to the benefits. We need that number.
Yeah. So, but she had she was a nurse, and she had worked while I was in medical school. We graduated from college at the same time, so she had worked those 4 years as a nurse. And so one of the offsets for all of the pain of leaving home and being away from her family and everything was that she wasn't working. So she could, so it wasn't like she was trying to do 2 jobs at once. She still only had 1 job, and that was raising the kids. And so she did pretty well with it. She never quite got into the idea that the wives wore the ranks of their husbands. So she was always hanging around and talking to, the more senior people's wives. And she didn't care, and they didn't care. So it all worked out. But
yeah.
The other thing that made it pretty easy for her in those days, I was actually broken service. I ultimately got out in 95, but in that first period of time between 84 and 95, the longest I was ever away from home was about 3 months, and so she didn't deal with a lot of the hardships of deployments and everything that a lot of the military spouses deal with.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's big, and I like to touch on, the significant others in a lot of my interviews, because even sometimes when you're not deployed, if you're pulling 120 hours a week, man, that's kind of like being deployed. I mean, most of your waking hours, you're at your work, your hospital in this case, or a ship later on, and a lot of people. I don't want to say a lot of people and reduce that, but there are a mass of people that don't even understand that war is real, let alone understand that the spouses and the children's and the mothers and the fathers, this is a package deal. When your spouse or your significant other or your child goes away to war or goes away for 120 hours a week helping out with an effort, whether that's any kind of job, doesn't matter. That puts a load on the other spouse and on the other family members, depending on the, severity and the danger of the situation, which later we'll get into with you, headed back out. And so I always want to touch on that. But, so after you do your rotation in PEDS and the other sections, did you have a feeling in your mind of what you liked the best?
So I always wanted to be a surgeon. There was no question about it. Going into medicine, I didn't understand why anybody would do medicine and not want to be a surgeon. But it's one of those, we always boil it down, simplify things. And it's like, to me, it's like a surgeon is like a mechanic who wants to get in and fix something. And, the non-surgical medical specialties, it's a lot of brain power, like a detective who wants to, doesn't particularly want to fix it, but they want to know what's broken and why is it broken and that kind of thing. And so it really is a personality driven thing, I think, for, probably 90% or more. I guess there's always outliers of people that don't quite fit the mold. And people said that I didn't really, personality wise, I was strange as a surgeon because I was a nice guy.
What, are they not nice guys generally?
And so, they say, especially in training and everything, they talk about, the surgeons typically are kind of brutish and yell a lot and godlike and all of that. And people always kind of said that I was just a down to earth, that they wouldn't know I was a surgeon talking to me unless they knew I was a surgeon, because I just didn't fit that mold. But at the same time, the mold of, it was always, I wanted to fix something, get it fixed, and move on to the next one to fix.
Check.
And so I always wanted to be a surgeon. Now, it was interesting. Internship was so miserable that I did stray a little bit. And for a little while, as I was doing my GMO stuff, I thought I would try and be a urologist. That was still surgery, but they had a much nicer residency. They didn't work near as hard as the general surgery residents. And for various reasons, because of cutting programs at Portsmouth and this and that, I didn't get back into urology right away. And I was so miserable as a GMO. I realized that, it's probably those 4 years of residency that would be miserable. I should probably still suck it up and do what I really wanted to do instead of being stuck in something I really didn't particularly want to do. So then I went back and finally got into the surgery program, general surgery.
And that's where you go next?
So after the 4 years as a GMO, then I went back to Portsmouth as a general surgery resident.
Okay, and walk me through that. Now you're coming back. Now you're a general surgery resident, and that means you're actually doing operations, I would assume, right? Every day?
Yeah. So at that point, basically, residency is kind of like an apprenticeship, and you're actually doing surgery. Start out with the simple stuff and going on. In those days, general surgery was still a lot of, kind of trained to do anything. It's changed a little bit, but the number of subspecialty surgical fields was much less. So we rotated through general surgery, neurosurgery, urology, gastroenterology, basically learning a lot of the other stuff. We like to always say that, our specialty, we learned to operate. So even though we might not operate on the neck all the time because we knew how to operate, we could go there and still operate in the neck, or we could operate wherever we needed to. Whereas a lot of subspecialists we talk about, they learned, and this is more tongue in cheek maybe, but that they learned operations, but not necessarily how to operate. It makes sense. And so anyway, if anything, the residency hours were worse than internship hours. And I still distinctly remember waking up about 4 in the morning after about 2 weeks after starting the residency and thinking I'll never be able to do this for 4 years, and just taking it one day at a time. After right around a year time frame, time was going so slow and I was feeling so miserable. I actually started counting off the days until I was finished. Something like 4,000, not 4,000, something like 1,200 or something days to go till I was finished. And throughout those 3 years, people would ask me, "Hey, how many days?" And I could spout it off. How many days until we were done. And but it was intense, and I got through it.
Why did they do that? Why is it structured that way?
Part of it is because it's cheaper for the hospital. At least it used to be, because I remember this was med school, not the Navy, but the same thing holds, that I was rotating in a hospital in med school, and we were drawing labs and doing that kind of thing, and somebody spoke up and said that the new management of the hospital was talking about creating IV teams and blood drawing teams, but the management said, no, why would we do that? We got free labor doing it now. Why would we spend the money to do that? Now, in the meantime, they started doing that because it winds up being cheaper, and the residency and internship hours have been drastically limited. But the other part of it is, I really think, is in order to get the amount of training that we got in that 4-year residency, you would have to stretch it out so long to get that same amount. And I mean, even today, with all the restrictions on hours and everything, a lot of residents are coming out of residency and feeling like they really aren't comfortable operating because they don't have the experience. And whereas, the numbers we had, number of cases we did in the old days was so much greater because we were there so long, doing it so long.
And I guess that was part of my question was, are they doing it so that they can get max experience and even maybe max experience under stress, and
yeah,
and then that can kind of play over.
That was always the argument, was that you need to be able to operate under stress and under tension, and one of the ways to artificially do that was to be sleep deprived.
Yeah.
And working those long hours, and the validity of that, I'm not sure, but that was one of the arguments they always said. The unspoken thing, in my opinion, was that when you get out of residency, you have to be able to you get paid by what you do, and so if you restrict a surgeon and say, hey, you can't operate, you can only operate for 8 hours a day, then all of a sudden he's not going to be able to do as many operations, not going to be paid as much, and nobody wants that. So nobody wants to have those restrictions. And lately, especially, we kept getting compared to commercial pilots in the cockpit, and the operating teams, like the team in the cockpit. And I always said one of the difference was they had a strong union, so that they got their hours limited, but they still got paid for it. They got paid, and in medicine, like I said, you get paid for the cases you do, and doctors like to make money, so they don't want anything that's going to restrict how many cases they can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, there's well, I don't want to say that I know for sure, but I suspect that if you looked at the happiness quotient of residents today versus 20, 30 years ago, they'd be much happier. But I don't, and there has been a change in the how surgeons and doctors see their life, and I mean, people basically want more of a life now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
a lot, especially surgeons, it was just understood if you went into surgery, you didn't have as much of a life. So
Check.
it's a little bit.
Check. And so let's get towards the end of residency as those days are counting down. Is that exciting for you? I would assume.
Oh yeah, yeah. So the way residency worked is by the time, pretty much by the end of our second year, because our program at that time had been cut to 2 residents per year group, and so by the end of the second year, our third year on, we were considered chief residents. And so we ran a team, and we were in charge of the team. And so we got, now with that came responsibility, but we were kind of ready for that. And we're finally starting to be able to do things, our way. And you know how it is. You always, when you're learning something, you always think, oh, I could do that better. If we did it this way, it would be better. And so then we things our own way and find out it didn't really make it any better. but it just, and you could start feeling the end was near, and the staff started treating you with a little bit more respect, and so it was much better as time went on. So
maybe not counting those days so closely in that last year.
Oh no, I'm still counting them. It was still long hours. Still tired. I mean, we talk about how and even the kids. The daughter, when I was an intern and my wife was pregnant, that daughter, Mary, still talked about how she was all excited. She was, I guess she was about 7 or something like that, and we went on a daddy-daughter date on a Saturday morning to go see the Muppet Christmas had just come out.
Nice.
And I lasted about 5 minutes before I fell asleep.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, and she still talks about it, and I heard her feelings, and I went to sleep, and she was scared to death because she was in this theater with strangers. And
Oh no.
And so I mean, it was, and at that point I was a senior chief resident, so I was, it was still a good times, but I was still tired all the time.
Yeah.
I was still falling asleep at the supper table and that kind of thing. So,
yeah. Now, did you have coming down to the end of your residency? Did you know where you wanted to be? Did you know what you wanted to specialize in at that point?
Well,
feel comfortable at least.
Well, general surgery is a specialty, so that was, and I was
okay.
At that point, I didn't want to do any subspecialty because I was done with. After residency, if you want to do a subspecialty, you do fellowship, which is a little bit better than residency, but not a whole lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Not a whole lot better. Usually it's 1 to 2 years, and at that point, I was done. I didn't want to do any more of that stuff. I wanted to get out, and I was happy with being a general surgeon. I thought I would be. So.
Mm-hmm.
But interesting as far as going, where was I going to go next? I spent my entire time planning to go to Gitmo when I got out of residency, because in those days, if you trained at Portsmouth, you were pretty much guaranteed you were either going to go to a ship to Iceland, because we still had a hospital there, or to Gitmo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I happened to, when I was on the Puget Sound as a GMO, we did our refresher training at Gitmo, and I looked at, it's a nice tropical island, wasn't too bad. And everybody I talked to that was there said they were bored to tears because there was not much to do medically. And But on the other hand, it was good for family time.
Mm-hmm.
It was an accompanied tour, so it was good for family time and, you know, going to the beach and scuba diving and doing all that kind of stuff. And so and nobody wanted to go to Gitmo. So I spent my time figuring, well, if I want to go to Gitmo, I probably won't have any problems getting there.
No competition, yeah.
So I had talked to Debbie, and we thought that would be a pretty good idea, as opposed to me getting on a ship and being gone for another 6 or 8 months or whatever after residency. And none of us really wanted to go to Iceland where it was cold. So I actually, a year before I finished, I called the detailer and said, hey, I know it's early, but I wanted to get my name on the list. And he said, all right, where do you want to go? And I said, Gitmo. And you could hear the pause. And he says, Gitmo? And I said, yeah. He said, nobody wants to go to Gitmo. And I said, yeah, no, I do. So he said, you're sure about this? And I said, yeah. He said, well, that makes my life a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
That was the plan. And then about December that year, 6 months later, I was operating with a new staff guy whose brother was at Gitmo. And so we were talking about it, and he told me that his brother thought he liked it so much he was going to extend.
Oh boy!
So Gitmo was 1-year orders at the time. So I finished the operation and got on the phone with the detailer. I said, remember me? And he said, yeah, you're the guy that wants to go to Gitmo. Let me guess, you don't want to go to Gitmo anymore. And I said, well, no, I actually do, but I'm hearing rumblings that the guy down there is going to wants to extend. And I said, I was the first one that called you. I don't want to be stuck at the end of the line with what's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
So he said, let me look at things. And he says, there's three surgery billets at Millington, Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and I've got it unofficially that all 3 of the people there are leaving. 2 getting out and 1's retiring. I guess that's what it was, or maybe they were all getting out. But anyway, all 3 of them unofficially were going to be leaving. And so he said, so I'm sure that at least one of those spots will be vacant. Would you be interested in that? Well, Millington was 3 hours from home.
Oh, yeah.
From Louisville. So I said, yeah, that'd be great. And he said, well, how about I pencil you in? And I said, well, how about if you just pin me in and we'll call it good?
Yeah.
He said, okay, I can do that. And so that's what he did. And so from that point on, I was set to go to Millington.
Gotcha. And what year are we talking about checking into Millington?
So I got there in 93.
Okay.
That was about a year before the BRAC that wound up saying that they needed to close.
Oh, check. And then you get bumped from there to a new duty station.
So that was what it was going to be. My oldest daughter started high school when we got there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got those orders, I really thought that set my career path. I was going to do 4 years in Millington, figured I could extend the 3 years to 4 years, get her through high school, would then do a couple years of whatever the Navy wanted me to do, go overseas or do whatever, and then find some place to go do 4 more years for the second daughter to get through high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd have 2 years left, and my wife and I could just do whatever, and we'd be fine. Little did we know we had another baby that was going to show up. But that was the plan when I got those orders. And then, like I said, BRAC came through and recommended that Millington close, and they were going to close at the end, around the end of my 3rd year.
Okay.
And so what that was going to mean was the oldest daughter was going to wind up going someplace new for her senior year.
Yeah.
In high school, and didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to go off someplace and leave the family behind in Memphis for her to finish her year by herself, the family without me. And unfortunately, I was kind of dumb. In retrospect, I probably could have called the detailer and said, hey, given all of this, is there any chance we can break my orders and give me, send me someplace new at the end too? And then that way, at least the daughter would be someplace for the last 2 years. I just assumed, well, I got 3 years orders, that's going to be it. So
Yeah.
I was, my time was up. My obligation was paid up after 2. And so I just decided for that reason, and my parents were getting older, my wife's parents were getting older, we just decided to get out and go home.
Check.
And so that's what we did.
Check. And so walk me through that once the decision's made and you're already living close to home at that point. What you just stay in that house, or
No, so we moved on back towards Louisville. I wound up getting into a practice with a older surgeon in a small town that was about an hour from Louisville.
Okay.
And, so I was in private practice there. Interestingly enough, no one ever asked me why I was getting out. When I was getting out, if anybody had asked me, I think and I'd have told them, I think they probably would have fixed the problem, done something. But nobody ever asked, and I never told, and so I wound up getting out, and it wound up being a good thing. At the end of I've been in civilian life for 5 years. My dad died at the end of the 5 years. My wife's dad died after about 4 years, and so we had that time back with family, and so it worked out from that standpoint.
Check. And how many years did you have in before you decided to get out?
So when I got out, I had 11.
11. Okay.
And for reserve points, I had 12.
Okay.
So if I decided to stay in the reserves and retire.
Check. Now, what happens after that? What brings you back in? What's the catalyst that brings you back in?
So, again, my dad had retired from the reserves, and he always talked about how he always liked the reserves. And he said, when that whole time he was in the reserves, he talked about, I get to go and play with the Navy and all this and get a little bit of a paycheck. Supplemental paycheck for the reserves. And he said, when I get out, when I retire, when I hit 60, I'll get a check for about $100 just for going to the mailbox every month. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was worth it. So when he hit 60, right about the time I was, where was it? I'm forgetting. Anyway, when he hit 60, he actually got about $550 a month instead of $100.
Came up a little.
Came up a little. And so, one of the things I didn't throw out there, I didn't get out of the Navy because I didn't like it. Mm-hmm, even my wife, I really had to convince her to let me join with the scholarship. When we decided to get out, she really didn't want me to get out. Mm-hmm. She knew that, in private practice, your paycheck's sort of dependent on patients and how busy you are and everything. She liked the regular paycheck from the Navy.
Yeah.
So she was actually she wasn't all that enthused about getting out. And so anyway, I decided I would keep my commission because I didn't want to lose all of those potential benefits from when I signed up because of the way things had changed.
Sure.
So I kept my commission, stayed in the IRR, which was interesting. When I went to get out, the guy in Manpower didn't know how to do a letter requesting that I be released from active duty because all doctors always just got out. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, what do you mean you don't want to resign your commission? And I told him he had to look up exactly what he had to do to make that happen. So anyway, I kept my commission, thinking that I would stay in the IR, individual ready reserve. No drilling or anything. It's just my name on the book somewhere. And then if I found that, and when I was sure that things were working out, that I could afford the time to spend a weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, I would go back in the drilling reserves and get my points for retirement. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I did that. So after about 2 years, I went to my partner and said, I think I can do this. It's going to mean that the biggest change it would mean for him was that we would have to make sure that his weekend on duty, on call, corresponded to my weekends with the reserves.
Yep.
Because we kind of bounced around. We were real flexible with our schedule. So, made sure that was okay with him. And then I was going to have to take 2 weeks a year. And in my practice, I got 4 weeks of vacation. And so I said, well, I didn't want to give up 2 full weeks of vacation. So I said I'd made the deal where I would take 1 week of paid vacation as my time away and 1 week of unpaid vacation.
Mm-hmm,
and that meant that was an extra week he was going to have to, cover. But he was okay with all of that. So after about 2 years, I went to the recruiter to get in the selective reserve, drilling reserve. And because I had made 05 before I got out, there was a across the board ban on 05s coming in. This was in the drawdown period in the 90s. Russia was gone. We didn't need the military anymore. And so even though the reserves was paying bonuses for general surgeons to come into the reserves, I couldn't because I was an 05.
Wild.
And so the guy said, do you care if I just keep your name? And if they allow us to go for waivers or release this restriction, we can give you a call. I said, sure. In the meantime, I actually called the Army and said, hey, I'm a general surgeon and, I'm an 05. The Navy doesn't want me in the reserves because I'm an 05. How about you guys? And he said, oh, yeah, we'll take it.
Yeah.
And the very next morning, he drove down from Louisville. It was about an hour, like I said, and to sign me up. And he was on his way out the door when it came out. And it was not something I'd tried to hide. It just never came up that I had in the Navy before I got out had an RK on my eyes for my vision. And at that time, that was a no-no in the Army. So he had to tear the paperwork up, and he said, sorry, there's no waivers or anything else. Now, nowadays, they encourage, eye corrective surgery.
Yeah.
Vision corrective surgery, but in those days, they didn't. So even though it was done on active duty, and, the Navy owned my eyes then at that point, the Army didn't want me. So then I just went back, and I kind of thought that was it. And then in the spring of 2000, the recruiter called me and said, hey, we can request a waiver for 05s. You still interested? And I said, yeah. And so about 2 months later, in April of 2000, I went back to the drilling reserves. And so then I did that. I did that for a year and a half, and then 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I put on 06 and on the second weekend in January, and on the Monday after that, I got a phone call at my office saying, well, actually my secretary receptionist told me, hey, when I showed up at the office after making rounds, she said, you got a call from the Reserve Center. They want you to call them as soon as you get back. They said they'll be there. And so at 5 o'clock on Monday morning, I called them, or Monday afternoon, I called them, and they said, yeah, we got orders here for you to go to Camp Lejeune you got to be there on Saturday.
Boom. Now,
Boom.
What, where were you at when the towers hit on 9/11?
I was in the OR.
Oh, okay.
I was in the OR. I was actually helping a gynecologist in a case, and we got finished. Went out, and in the doctor's lounge, the TV was on. There was one or two other people there watching it. And as I remembered at that point, they didn't really know what had happened. It was only the first one had been hit by that point. On the pictures, there was papers falling down, and all they knew was that a plane had hit. And then while we were watching, the second plane hit. And so then I stayed there and watched for a little bit longer, but then I had to go to another hospital for my own cases, for my own stuff. And while I was on the road, I don't remember whether it was whether I heard it on the radio or when I got to the next hospital, but it was while I was on the road that the Pentagon was hit. Mm-hmm. And so when I got to the other hospital, then it an orthopedist that I kind of talked around with and palled around with a little bit was there, and he says, "We're at war."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that was it.
Yeah.
And
then shortly thereafter, you come up for orders to Lejeune.
Mm-hmm.
Now, talk about that. You hadn't been to Lejeune at that point, right?
No, as a matter of fact, I was scared to death of being anywhere around Marines because because I knew that there was a big difference between the Navy and the Marines as far as military bearing and all that stuff, and also that just between the regular Navy and the regular Marines, and then you throw medical types in on top of that. And we didn't know anything about being military. Let's be real. And I was scared to death to be anywhere around the real Marines that I would be expected to be halfway military. And so I didn't know what to expect. And to be honest, and I sort of know, but I don't really know, but it wasn't just me. Everybody hated Lejeune. Yeah. They didn't want to come to Lejeune. And so when I found out I got orders down here, it scared me to death. Mm-hmm. I had one big advantage over everybody else, and I'm the first to admit it, is when I showed up at Lejeune, I was an 06.
That's the only advantage.
That's a big advantage, come to find out.
Yeah.
So I got down here, and it was the whole thing was interesting. Like I said, I called Monday afternoon. I called the reserve center. They said, "Yeah, we got orders. You need to be here at the reserve center on Monday morning to receive the official orientation and all that stuff." And then I was supposed to be at our Naval Support Center, NTTC. I forget what the acronym was, but whatever it was in Millington. I was supposed to be there on Saturday. And then ultimately come to Camp Lejeune. Well, I went on Wednesday morning, and I spent Tuesday calling everybody, telling them I was closing my practice, and I was the only surgical practice in the two hospitals I covered. So that was leaving them in the lurch. The Wednesday morning thing was all about what to expect on active duty. Well, I'd spent 11 years on active duty. I sort of knew that. So that was kind of a little bit of a waste of time. And so then on Wednesday afternoon, I finally said, you know what? I want to just call down there and see what's going on. So I called the surgery department in Lejeune and got a hold of another surgeon. He said, "I don't know why you're coming. We don't need you." I said, "We got plenty of surgeons."
Oh, good.
And so it's like, well, then why am I going through all this? So I said, you know what? I'm a captain now. I'm going to call the CO.
Boom.
So I did. So I called the CO, got his secretary. The CO was out. And it turned out that the CO was actually somebody I knew from residency. When I'd been a resident, he was a radiologist, staff radiologist. And he was the nice guy that we always went to when we needed anything. When we needed to read on the films or we needed a special study or whatever, he was the one we looked for. Mm-hmm. And so but anyway, I didn't get to talk to him right then. I talked to the secretary, and she said, "Oh yeah, we need you. I don't know who you talked to, but we definitely need you. We can't wait for you to get here, blah blah blah. And when are you coming?" Mm-hmm. So I said, I was going to Millington on Saturday to do the check-in stuff, and then I would be there whenever. And she said, "Oh, you don't need to do that. Just come straight here. We got one of those. We got that department here. They can take care of all of that for you." And so I drove down here, got here on Saturday morning or Saturday evening, and I was supposed to check in by Saturday. Mm-hmm. So I showed up at the quarterdeck, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, here's my orders." And they said, "Okay, great." And they stamped the order, said, "See you on Tuesday."
Sweet.
What do you mean? I said, "Why Tuesday?" "Well, it's Martin Luther King weekend. It's a holiday till Tuesday."
Oh, man, yeah.
So I knocked myself out to get down there, and then didn't have anything to do till Tuesday.
That seems typical to me.
Mm-hmm.
Still today.
So then I was literally about a week later. I forget who called me. Somebody called me. I guess it was my wife called me and said, "Hey, we just got a call. The Navy's looking for you. They say that you're you're AWOL. And I said, really? And so I forget who I called, but it turned out that I really was supposed to go to Millington. When I didn't show up to Millington, they had me as not reporting.
Yep.
And whoever at Lejeune had not bothered to let anybody know that I was there. So then they had to figure that all out. And there was still some other things, check boxes I had to go through that the hospital hadn't put me through yet to get me on active duty.
Gotcha. Now, how did you end up liking Lejeune? Like duties and environment and all of that?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I've heard this from a lot of people that came out of civilian life, and that when I got to Lejeune, literally they thought I was working hard, and I thought I was hardly working.
Yeah.
Because in the civilian world, like you make your money based on what you're doing, and in the Navy there was none of that. So it was interesting that coming off of the reserves. Out of the reserves, that I was able to get my privileges in like 3 days. So I was, I reported in Tuesday, came back on Tuesday morning, went through all the check-in stuff, and by Thursday I was seeing patients. I was privileged.
Wow.
When I ultimately was back on active duty and going between duty stations, it never took less than 2 to 3 weeks to get privileges. And so, but I started working. They had I sat down with the CO. He said he wanted me to be his spy in the surgery department, because he said we got all these surgeons and we can't seem to keep up. We got a long waiting list and we're deferring people out, and the numbers don't make sense. And so basically I found out that they were hardly working, and I started seeing patients. And I had to argue with the clerk that was in charge of the schedules, because he said my schedule was too optimistic. There's no way I could keep up with it. And I said, well, just trust me on this, and we'll see. And after 2 weeks, I was in a morning clinic, and all of a sudden there was no patients scheduled for me. And I went out and asked him what's going on, and he said, well, there's no patients in the system waiting. You've cleared it out.
Yep.
And so I actually started setting my schedule so that I only did morning clinics unless I was on call, or and I would obviously operate in the afternoon. I said basically, if as long as there's no waiting time for referrals for consults, don't schedule me in the afternoons. And so I actually got called to the CO's office because I was seen leaving frequently at lunchtime. And I told him, I said, the only way you can reward me for hard work is time. And I said, I've cleared out your backlog. I'm clearing out your surgical log, and there's nothing for me to do. So I'm going off and I'm working out and enjoying life. And if there's something to do, they call me and I come and take care of it. He said,
yeah.
Okay.
Now, was there any, with the other surgeons who were hardly working, how did that get handled? Sometimes these things handle themselves when you have a new leader come in and they start clearing things out and kind of showing them up. Was that the case, or did it take more?
No, they just kind of knew I was going to go away, so they just kind of ignored me. And I didn't make a big deal out of it. I didn't say like I'm working hard and you're not, and why not? I just went about doing my thing. We talked about, one of the surgeons talked about how there was never any, he never got to operate because there was never any cases. And I commented, and he wondered why all of a sudden I was doing 5 and 6 cases a day, a week on my one OR day. And I said, well, you got to see them in clinic to get the cases, and you're not seeing any clinic. He actually picked up his pace a little bit and saw that reward, but the others, it really was, I think it was, they knew I was reservist. I was only going to be there for a period of time. They just figured they'd wait me out, and that's basically what happened. And since I didn't care about what they were doing, I just did my own thing and took care of patients. Gotcha.
So, taking care of patients, you're down here at Lejeune. What year are we at now? We're post 2001, but where are we at?
This was January to June of 02.
02, yep. 02.
It turned out that the reason they recalled me was it was basically in those days, recalled reservists were like found money. It was just, they kind of, the big Navy sent out the word, hey, you need any reservists? And so they had a surgeon here that was assigned to the Marines, to the Marine Medical Battalion, who, when those guys are in garrison, they would come over and operate at the hospital. Well, when the Afghanistan invasion happened, he went off with the Marines, and so the hospital said, "Oh, we're short a surgeon. We're down a surgeon because of the war. Send us a new one."
Yep.
So that's who I was replacing. He actually came back after I'd been here for about a month, so it was just, that was the wartime. Of course, then wasn't too long after I left in June. Shortly after that, then they started talking about Iraq.
Right. So making this transition down to Lejeune, I want to talk more about the family. How is the family taking a transition out of Memphis down to Lejeune and then getting into that new work flow?
Well, so now they're not in Memphis. They're actually in southern Indiana now. We had moved.
Okay.
From the first, I had actually started my own private practice, in July of 2000, and so it was in southern Indiana. Basically, I was in a suburb of Louisville.
Okay. My bad.
And so when I got recalled, of course, nobody knew what was going to happen. So it was essentially like a deployment, because I went off. They stayed at home. They didn't know whether I was going to wind up going over to Afghanistan with the invasion or what was going to happen. But it was 5.5, 6 months away from home. We talked on the phone. In those days, you still had to worry about long distance rates and calling after hours and that kind of thing. But we did manage. I guess we managed 2 visits together. We met in Gatlinburg for a weekend, and then they came down here in like April for a week to visit, and I managed to get home back to Indiana for a weekend for the let's see, who was it? Youngest daughter, first communion.
Okay.
So that was something you can't do with a deployment, but we were apart. Their life didn't change, and then back at that time period, that was still the great patriotic resurgence of everybody was very supportive of the military at that point. So they got people were appreciative of what they were going through. So it was not a lot of difference.
Right. So they didn't have to make the move, but they're still, you're still dealing with that time away again.
Of course, a big difference from a deployment was I was away, and they, now granted, I know, a lot of spouses and families when the active duty member deploys, they'll pack up and go home. Wherever family is. But they were not, my family was not around a military post. So it was a matter of finding somebody that took track care for medical care, and there wasn't a nearby commissary or any of that to help them out. But again, by that time my wife was an 11-year veteran too, so she knew how to navigate things that way too. So
sure. So what happens from Lejeune? You guys activate for a deployment?
So I was just backfill here at Lejeune.
Okay.
So then I was released late May, early June. I guess I got about a week of leave I'd built up. So I guess my official release was June, and I left in May back home. Unfortunately, that's where we found out that all of the things, if a reservist is called up, the employer's got to keep their job for them and put them back in. Well, guess what? If you're self-employed, that doesn't help. And so I started trying to put the practice back together. And basically the two hospitals I worked at were not supportive because they said, you left. We had to find other coverage, and the other coverage just said they're not going to do this again. If we want them to keep covering, we got to keep feeding patients to them. So they said, basically, if you get out of the reserves and you don't have to worry about going away again, we'll support you. But otherwise, we're not gonna be able to support you the way we were. And so we struggled with that for about 6 months. It was interesting. One of the fun parts, fun kind of thing is how our government works. Here I had been recalled on short notice, and so we had to shut down my Medicare provider status. And when I came back and applied to get it back, they said, "Well, it'll be about 6 months." and we're Classic. Like, "Really? I get called by the military, blah blah blah." And it's all right. That's just the way it is. So I called my congressman.
Yeah.
And I said, this is what's happened to me. You're supposed to, I'm supposed to be supported, blah blah blah. And about half an hour after I talked to the congressman's office, I got a call from Medicare, and they said, "When do you want to start this?"
Yeah, I bet.
So, like, tomorrow? Okay. So,
Perfect.
Like, no problem. But it's still, it's sad that two government agencies like that, and that's what you got to go through.
Yeah.
To get any kind of cooperation. But anyway, I struggled trying to put my practice back together and trying to make it grow back to where it was. Right. Literally, like in the middle of December, before I got recalled, I had gotten so busy. I remember sitting at the hospital on a Friday evening about 9:30, thinking I'm working too hard. I'm going to have to either start telling people no, that I can't do everything, or start looking for a partner. That's how well the practice was going. Now, a little over 6 months later, I can't find patients. Yeah. And so then in December of that year, my billet in the reserves had been changed to billet with Bethesda.
Okay.
And so in December that year, they were ramping up for the Iraqi invasion. And I found out that I had not been on active duty long enough to have prolonged dwell time. It was basically day for day. And so my day for day was pretty much up. And so I thought, it's like, well, the last thing I need is another recall.
Mm-hmm.
So I called the department head of the surgery department at Bethesda and said, "Hey, you don't know me, but I'm a surgeon assigned to, the reserve unit supporting you guys. And I'm wondering about what you think the odds are of me getting recalled." And he said, "Well, I can't tell you anything because of OPSEC and all that, right. But we provide the staffing for the hospital ship for the Comfort. And last week they sailed." And so he said, "Draw what conclusions you want to from that."
Right.
And so my conclusion was they were going to have reserve backfills coming in. And so I talked it over with my wife. I said, "You know what? Life was actually pretty good at Lejeune. And, I don't want to give up." By that time, I had like 15 years towards reserve retirement. And I just couldn't see giving that up. And so she gave her okay to come back on active duty. And so I called the specialty leader and found out what I needed to do to come back on active duty. And so it actually took 6 months to make it happen. Mm-hmm. But fortunately that took me off of the recall list because I was coming back. And so July, I reported back to Lejeune July 23rd of 2003.
Okay. And when you check back in, does it seem different around here, around Jacksonville, around Camp Lejeune area?
At that point?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, at that point, a lot of Marines were gone. If I remember, I don't think they'd all gotten back from OIF yet.
Mm-hmm.
And things were still very supportive of the military and everything. But that all I had to go by was the way it had been a year before, and so
Sure.
it was pretty much the same. Now,
Yeah,
we didn't really talk about it, but I really liked it down here.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the weather was great. I like I like to say that Jacksonville is like the biggest small town in the country, because it's got the population it's pretty big, but it's really still got small town
That's right.
values and all that. And it is it's a military town, so it's very supportive of the military. And so when I came back, at that point I needed 9 years, 8.5 years for active duty retirement, which was my plan. And when I came back, we intended to stay here for those 8.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
My leader said, no surgeon wants to go to Lejeune, so if you want to stay there,
You're made.
There'll be no problem.
So
that was the plan. This was going to be home until I retired. It didn't work out that way for various reasons, but we always liked it here.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, so what comes after that?
So I got here in July. I came by myself because we weren't sure when it was going to happen, when I was going to get here. We didn't want to sell the house or anything back home.
Sure.
And so by that point, the two oldest daughters were in, let's see. They were both away. Both were in college at that point, I guess it was. The youngest one was in like the third grade, had just third grade. And so we didn't want to, until we knew for sure what was happening, didn't want to put the house on the market or anything. And so Debbie and the youngest daughter, my wife Debbie and the youngest daughter stayed behind, and I came here on my own. And then so I was here. I was not greeted with open arms. It was interesting. The CO here had changed. He was the old CO, the one that I had known, was very supportive, couldn't wait, was excited that I was coming back here. But in the meantime, before I could get back here, they'd had change of command, and the new CO didn't know me from Adam. And he was like, we don't need any more surgeons. We got all the surgeons we need. Why are they sending me? And so I'm like, well, because I wanted to come here. I liked it here. And so anyway, I got here in July, went to work, and on a Wednesday afternoon at the end of September, I was in the OR at like 4:35 in the afternoon. My oldest daughter, oh, that's right, she was in medical school by that time. My oldest daughter was here visiting just by herself, and she was in the OR watching while I was operating. She could do that because she was a med student, and she was in the Navy with the scholarship program. So they were willing to let her be in the OR. My department head comes, taps me on the shoulder, and says, "You're going to Djibouti on Saturday." So basically, what happened? They had a FRSS fleet. I forget what FRSS stands for. I can't believe that anymore. Forward Resuscitative Surgical System.
Okay.
Which is basically the portable surgical team that goes with the Marines. They had one slated to go to Djibouti to support special ops there, and one of the surgeons had caused so much trouble basically that the Marines said that we ain't taking him. We need somebody else, and I was it. Gotcha. And so it was interesting. The CO wanted to talk to me after the department head, after I got out of the OR, basically because after giving me such shit for not needing me he wanted to thank me for not raising any hell for the short notice or anything else. It's like, you're in the Navy. That's what happened. I don't know why you would expect any difference. He asked me if there was anything I could do for me. I said, well, if you could get me paid, it would be great. But I hadn't gotten paid yet. But anyway, so it turned out we wound up, we were supposed to fly out on a C-17 out of Cherry Point on Saturday. It wound up, it kept getting pushed back because the Air Force couldn't spare a C-17 until Wednesday. So my Debbie and all of the kids came out to visit to see me off, and they had to go back on Saturday. But Debbie and the youngest one were able to stay until I actually left. So we had 3 or 4 days together before left. And in that time period, we had time to look around and figure out where we were going to live. And we wound up looking at on-base housing and found out that, the on-base people were pretty supportive of the military. Go figure, especially when you're deployed. And so that led to us making the decision to live on base, so that actually Debbie moved with the youngest and our pets and everything on Thanksgiving weekend while I was gone. They moved without me, and so all of the neighbors and everybody pitched in, helping her get set up and getting things hooked up and all that. So it worked out well that way. So
the family really bonded together over there on the base. And they're all in the similar, if not the exact same situation, so they can empathize with each other and have that shared experience, shared camaraderie, both when when the service member's home and abroad. So
I mean, it's every time she had any problem until I got back, it was she had a list of numbers she could call, and somebody'd be coming to help her out right away. It was funny. The daughter had a cat that when they got here, the cat escaped because the cat hated cars and had been in the car for 2 days and escaped and didn't come back.
Oh no!
Ultimately, the cat came back, but while Alex was, she's third grade, 7, 8 years old, is wandering, and then the cat's name was Kitty because she had named the cat when she was 2, and so it was Kitty, and so she was going up and down the housing, going, here Kitty, and some guy came out and asked her what was going on. She said she was looking for her cat, and so then this guy is going around looking into garage doors and everything, going, here Kitty, and then we I forget what his last name was, but anyway, it turned out he was a General Select.
Oh, well, goody.
Oh, it was General Select Whistler. My wife just said it was Whistler. And so we always say, it's kind of neat to have a general walking around looking for your cat.
Looking for your cat, yeah. Oh, that's hope.
Yeah,
that's hope. So, now, at some point, your daughter comes in, and then you guys end up on a mission together or on the same ship together, right?
So that was we went to, so she went through the scholarship program, did her internship, and became a flight surgeon before she went to residency. And we managed to pull some strings and work behind the scenes and get assigned to the Harry S. Truman together. So because she was a flight surgeon, she was assigned to the air group, and I was ship's company, so we were in different chains of command. So it was legal to do that, and so we managed to pull that off.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And what's that experience like for you?
Oh, so it was awesome. I mean, having my daughter with me, and she's one of these people that everybody knows who she is. That she never met a stranger, and she talked to everybody and anybody, and so she actually made several of the training cruises before deployment. Before I got there, she got to the air group in February of that year. I didn't get to the ship until like September, and so by the time I got there, everybody knew her, including the admiral and the CO and everybody knew her, and so by the time I got there, when I got my orders, they already knew her. And the day I got my orders, the ship's XO called me asking me why I was coming to the carrier, because they already had a senior medical officer. They didn't need an 06 coming on board. And I said, hey, I'm just being a surgeon. I don't. He's like, well, you know, the SMO is going to be your boss. He's an 05. Are you going to be okay with that? And I said, the last thing I want to do is be the boss. I just want to be the surgeon. And so then that was okay. And then but the CAG called April, my daughter, in. And he was concerned that I was being an overbearing father, that he was trying to ruin his daughter's fun and making, looking over her shoulder and everything. And she's like, had to convince me, oh no, we've been working on this together. I think it'll be awesome. We want to do this. And so, they were okay with it. And so we did the Gulf deployment, and we had a lot of fun with it, even though the ships. So by that time, she was already married, so we had different last names. Mm-hmm. And like the first month I was there, the ship's paper put out an article about us. But throughout the entire cruise, different people would come to me. Like the chaplain came to me and said, I got somebody that came down and said, there's a captain and a lieutenant running around, male and female, and they're it's just not right. They're just all the time together. And unfortunately, I said, it would be great if one of them would say, you know what, not only that, but they're both married and not to each other.
Right.
No, but they wouldn't take it that far. But we did have fun with it that way, and we went to Rome together, on Liberty, and had a port call, Liberty call in Marseille. So we got time there together, and Crete, and it was just a really unbelievable time. We like to do jigsaw puzzles. So every night we met in the wardroom and would work on puzzles. And that was one of the things that people would say. One of the chaplains said, he told one of these guys I was talking about, he said, not only that, but every night they're in the wardroom together, and when they go their separate ways, they kiss each other goodnight. And so, I had more than one person that came to me and said, I just wish that I could have a relationship with my daughter like you've got. Mm-hmm. So it was awesome.
No, that's an awesome thing. And my kids are young and weren't even around when I was traveling the world, and I wouldn't have wanted them in most of the places that I was going, as an infantry Marine. But there were places that were cool that I would have loved to have shared experience with my family members. There were those places for me, Cyprus, Crete, Greece, even just some of these places that were just in passing. You only get a couple of hours. If I could share that with my people from home, or with my father, or with my son now, I believe that would be a very, very, very cool experience. So, all right. Well, so since I missed that, let's go back. I really wanted to touch on that deployment with your daughter, but I got out of loop with chronological order. Let's go back before that and catch me up on your desert deployments.
Okay. So the Djibouti deployment actually was a we were going there to support special ops, and it turned out, if you looked at the timeline, literally at about the same instant that we're putting our boots on the bus to head for Cherry Point, they were putting that mission on hold, AFRICOM. The plan was they were going to send the spec ops guys out, 7 or 8 hours by air out into the badlands of Africa, and they didn't have any kind of medical support. So the plan was they were going to take us and put us about an hour away from them in the middle of the badlands, and provide a few Marines for security, and we were going to be there as a surgical support for the special ops mission.
Sure.
But literally, as we were getting on the bus to head over, they put that mission on hold. They didn't cancel it. So we got there. which in and of itself was kind of interesting. But we get there and they said, we don't know what we're going to do with you. Just do some training and we'll figure out what we're going to do. So we put our tents up, took them down, put them up, took them down, did that for a little while. And then the tents started breaking. So I said, I was the OIC. I said, well, that's enough of that. We don't want to break them. And then after we'd been there not quite a month, they came to me and said, hey, could we put you guys on a small ship, and could you operate on a small ship? And I said, sure. And so they put us on an LPD, the USS Ogden.
Okay.
We left about half of our support people. Our unit was about 28 people, including nurses, corpsmen, and the Marine security. And we left we went aboard with about 12 people. There was 2 surgeons, an orthopedic surgeon, anesthesia provider, an OR nurse, and a couple of other corpsmen. And the idea was that the spec ops guys were gonna go ashore up and down the African coast doing things, and we were gonna be there on the ship that didn't normally have surgical capabilities, and they didn't want to use one of the bigger decks because they didn't want to draw attention to themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we basically floated up and down the African coast for 2 months, and every once in a while we'd go to River City, and the spec ops guys would go off and do their thing and then come back aboard, and then we'd go somewhere else. And so in all of that, nothing bad happened. They didn't need us. We didn't do anything. But then after about 2 months, we got back to Djibouti. And they said, okay, thanks a lot. We don't need you anymore. And they sent us home.
Hey, man, coming into my ears, that's good news. That means nobody, a board surgeon is my favorite kind, especially coming from our community. And just to catch people up on why this is important to me, as an infantryman coming up, training and then deploying into both Iraq, Afghanistan. I did do a deployment to Gitmo early in my career as well. But Iraq and Afghanistan, when you're deploying into combat and you're in my position as a squad leader, what I teach my Marines is, as soon as he gets hit, we got self-care, buddy care, doc care, corpsman care. Mm-hmm. After that, if we inside of an hour can get a helicopter to land or a truck to come and get our guy back to the next echelon of care, a trauma center where they actually have surgical teams. If we can do that in under an hour, generally, depending on the severity of the wounds and the stabilization that occurs on the battlefield, generally they call that the golden hour. If we can get that person to the next echelon of care, level 1 trauma care center, somebody with surgery, like Ken and his team are providing on these deployments, then the odds of that service member living through his experience or her experience drastically improves. 60 minutes to the next trauma care center with good stabilization, a lot of times we get that back. We get that Marine back or that soldier back. And so it's very important to have these co-located areas, whether it be on a ship or in the middle of the Badlands, that have this technology and the capabilities to provide level 1 trauma surgeries and care to these guys. So it's very important to me, and I've never had somebody on that's been in that situation. So if you wonder, you're sitting here for the last hour wondering about why this may be important to me, that's why it's important to me, because I've had guys that inside that golden hour had to get somewhere very quickly, and not that it always worked out, but the fact that these people like Ken and his compatriots that were with him on his deployments, without them being there, then I can't get hurt. I can't get scratched. I can't get an infection. I can't take a through and through. Without that care, I can't do that and then make it back. And so it's very important to me. So just wanted to throw that out there, but go ahead, Ken.
That was it was interesting with the spec op guys that we had on the ship. So they had offloaded all of the regular Marines. The Ogden was part of a MU. They offloaded all the Marines in Djibouti. I felt sorry for those guys because they weren't going to have anything to do for those 2 months. And so the ship was, there was, I don't know, a couple hundred spec ops, if that many guys on board, and then us, and then the regular ship's crew. So but time and time again, these spec op guys would come up to us and say, that they were used to operating where there was no, they didn't expect surgical capabilities because nowhere close to where it was. And to have us on board, that we couldn't believe how much that meant to them. And,
I mean, just think, like, for me to know that I have surgical care, almost in a moment's notice when things go bad, that gives me as a warfighter a warm and fuzzy. If you were to say, hey, if you get hit, you got nothing, that, that's a whole different scheme that you're going to run when you don't have care. And so, yeah, I could definitely empathize with, with those feelings of comfort and help that's going to be available to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to tack onto that, just to let you know, I mean, I was in position to, be on some planning things and what have you. The Marines especially, but even the Navy in their own way, recognize that importance, and they spend a lot of time figuring out how they can keep that surgical capability within that hour time frame. And to that point, the Marines actually a couple years ago started paying for the billets for active duty surgeons. That has not increased the numbers of surgeons, but what that's done is that's taken the surgeons that normally would be just assigned to hospital billets wherever, and it assigns them to the medical battalions, Marine medical battalions, and so that those guys, then the Marines have control of them, so that they can train them and do what they need to do, so that then when they need them to deploy, just like I did, instead of having a bunch of people that don't necessarily know anything about the Marines or anything else. They're coming ready, trained, ready to go, and so that is not a insignificant amount of money or priority that the Marines are showing by putting that out there and putting that priority on getting those surgeon billets and the support care that go with those surgeons. So
sure.
the Marine leadership gets it. And I had more than one senior Marine. I remember I had a Marine general that his daughter went to school where my daughter went, and he just caught me in the hallway one time and thanked me for my service. And I was like, what do you mean, everybody, yours, thank you for yours and what have you. And he said, no. He said, we recognize we need you surgeons. We need you guys. We can't send our men into harm's way, into combat without the support you guys provide. And so, the leadership of the Marines, they get it, they understand it, and they recognize that it's hard to provide that support, but they do what it takes to make sure they have.
Yeah, coming up in the service, there's always parochial attitudes and parochial personalities and natures, to the intramural squabbles that we have with each other, with one another, with you're from the Navy and, we're from this is the men's department of the Navy. Maybe you'd hear that come up. You see the gaffes back and forth to the Army dogs. And at the end of the day, when bullets are flying and there's another U.S. member on the field with you, it doesn't matter what his uniform looks like. And that was something that's a piece of humility and a little slice of humble pie that I got late in my career, because to that point, I really didn't need a trauma surgeon, and I never had a use for one. So it wasn't on my, it's not in my purview, let's say. And then when you start having guys get riddled and blown up, and you want them back and you need them back and you want them to live, you find a whole new, just a whole new depth of appreciation for medical staffing and for logistical staffing and things of that nature. So that's something that I wish that I would have got younger in my career.
When you look at it, when we were in Iraq, so we would take care. We got both Army and Marine, mainly Marine, but we've got some Army casualties run through as well. And so, Army Marines, we had Navy medical taking care of you in the initial surgical care. And then guess who would then come and take them away and get them to the back would then be the Air Force. So you know, it was a tri-service
combined effort for sure.
Combined effort to take care of people.
Absolutely.
And,
absolutely. Now, so you go into Iraq as well and Afghanistan?
So I went to Iraq in 2004. This was Djibouti, I got 48 hours notice of deployment. So Iraq I got a week.
Oh, good. A little more.
So well, actually not quite a week. It was the Tuesday after Labor Day. I come in and I'm checking emails, and I get notice that I need to be in Pendleton by the following Monday. And so that was so I was a last minute replacement for a surgeon for a surgical group going to Iraq, and so I wound up going through Pendleton to get my gear basically, and then went on to Iraq and went to Camp Lejeune.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember that one.
No, I don't.
So Lejeune was an old Iraqi air base, and we were virtually halfway between Fallujah and Ramadi.
Okay.
And so we were there during when Ramadi was hot, and then during the Fallujah battle to retake Fallujah. So we were there was actually a surgical company in Fallujah that basically during the battle they took the casualties from one side of the river, and we took them from the other side of the river.
Okay.
And so that was the only one of my deployments where I actually was involved in combat casualties.
Now talk to me about combat casualties, because it's one thing to be blue siding in a hospital and dealing with training incidents and ailments and things of that nature. Kind of breathe a little bit on that deployment when you start taking in combat casualties.
So I mean, to me, that was the the high point, or that was what my whole career was about, was to take care of casualties. I mentioned earlier on that as a general surgeon, we were trained to operate, not to do an operation. And part of our training was trauma. And so I always felt like I was, every day that I was operating in the hospital stateside, I was training to do the job when the time came. And so, and that's basically what happened. The group I went with, we were actually 2 FRISs combined with 2 surgical, or 2 STP, shock trauma platoons.
Yep.
We were combined into one. We were basically a surgical company without the holding capacity. We had the same OR surgical capability, but we didn't have the non-surgical care, and we didn't have the means to take care of people for more than a day or two after we got them. We needed to keep moving them on. And that was a bit of a new concept. The FRSSs during the Afghani invasion proved their worth, but they were only capable of taking one patient at a time. And so, it didn't, a helicopter taking 2 casualties couldn't do any good stopping there because it was too much.
Yeah.
And so they decided, the Marines, I don't know who made the decision, but decided that if we combine this big group, then maybe that would multiply our capability. And that's what happened. And it was proved during Fallujah, during that week, 10 days, we took over 120 casualties, something like that. We never had to close down. We never had to say we were full overflights or anything. We had 3 anesthesia providers, so we could have 3 tables going, and we had 3 general surgeon and orthopedic surgeon, and so we could keep all 3 tables busy if we needed to, and that's basically what we did. And so that was our capability. We were a role 2, which I don't know if you know what that means. So a role 1 care is non-surgical. That's, like you said, buddy care, or the shock trauma platoon is basically the mobile ER, where they provide, more advanced resuscitation, but they don't have surgical capabilities. And then role 2 is where you get into the surgical capabilities, where we talked about doing, what we did was damage control surgery. We operated, stopped bleeding. In the case of abdominal wounds, stop the, close up the bowel or whatever, just to stop the leakage. We didn't necessarily fix it. We didn't necessarily hook things back together. Our goal was to get in and out, get people stabilized and get them on down the road to definitive surgical care. And that's what we did, and we did a pretty good job of that. It was at that point that IEDs were really coming into their own, and we were seeing patterns of injuries that we didn't expect. I mean, we basically, before the Gulf, we were all, we always thought, chest wounds, abdominal wounds, those were what was going to get you. But body armor was so good that we didn't see much of that. We saw the legs blown off, the arms blown off, heads battered around.
Sure.
And so but it was, we had something like pretty much if you showed up to us with a pulse, you would leave us alive. We would keep alive. And so it was very satisfying. We would have patients, Marines, laying there on the gurney who, their last words to us before they went to sleep was thanking us for being there. And it's like, thank you for doing what you're doing. You're doing way more than we're doing. But it was intense and very satisfying. It was also, it was kind of interesting. We did come under indirect fire a couple times, no big deal. I always joke that when the alarm went off, that meant it was all clear, because by the time the alarm went off, the guys would fire off it was always 3 mortars. Oh yeah. And, they'd jump out of their truck somewhere, fire them off, and then jump back in their truck and go. Yep. And by the time the alarm went off, they were already gone, and there was no more coming.
That's right.
And of course, I was afraid to let the family know what was going on, that there was even that much going on. So, I didn't let them know. And I was actually on the phone one time when a mortar went off about 50 yards outside the tent, and it was like, boom, and it's like, April, gotta go. Yep. And she didn't know, and a couple times we were operating when they were going off, and we just pick up the patient, put them down on the floor, and just kept doing what we could do on the floor until we were sure it was all clear, and put them back up on the table. And so I mean, I can't. That's nothing like going through what you guys go through in the infantry or anything, but
I think it sounds exactly like what we go through. I mean, when there's outgoing missiles or rockets or mortars, there's nothing you can do. Right. It's going to land somewhere, and anywhere you run for safety could potentially be where it's going to land, is the way that we felt about it. It's almost a desperate feeling on the battlefield when you hear that outgoing boom, because now you're like, well, it's out. Yeah.
And somewhere.
Get small, fellas. Yeah.
So, but anyway, so that was my time. That was what I did for 27 years. Was that 6-month period was what it was all about.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, and your staff, because just like those Marines are thanking you, the last things that they're saying before they go under or ultimately, pass on, that's that gratitude that comes from them, that gratitude that I knew you were here to help me. So that's huge to me. Now, did you go into Afghanistan as well, or no?
I did. So I went to Delaram.
Okay.
We got there in the fall of 2010.
Okay.
Again, it was another FRIS. In this case, it was one FRIS.
What is that? A FRIS?
So the FRIS it stands for Forward Resuscitative Surgical System, and basically that is the surgical team with its equipment that was designed to be able to be lifted by helicopter and dropped wherever it's needed. We got I guess it was three of the I even forget the name of the tents, but the three self-supporting tents. That basically was one was for the OR, one was for the recovery and pre-op, and one was for living. And we got all the, we got everything we needed to operate with between equipment, and we actually had oxygen generators. They were actually oxygen filters that just basically sucked the oxygen sucked everything else out of the air, away from the oxygen, and left us with oxygen.
Gotcha.
And then generators. And so the idea was that we could, on our own, be dropped somewhere and within an hour or so take patients.
Yeah.
It was designed to, we could support 16 patients without resupply.
Wow.
It was interesting that a lot of the line people didn't understand that without resupply thing. They thought that it meant we could take 16 patients at once.
Yeah.
And I have to explain, there's one surgeon, me, I'm really good, but I can only operate on one person at a time.
Yep.
So that's something that was interesting in discussing, war plans and everything. And they thought they were going to have 16 patients taken care of at once.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah, I understand. Now, Delaram was kind of spicy when I was there in 2010. Now, I wasn't in Delaram. I was in Marja, northern Marja. But if you're talking about the fall, you're talking about like September time frame?
Yeah, September. We actually got there in October.
Okay.
So the group that I was with, the Med Battalion, we trained together, and in that group we had 3 FRISs and 3 of the shock trauma platoons. One went to Marja, I think it was Marja, and where they were still seeing stuff. Delaram, we were there for 6 months and saw basically nothing.
Okay.
And then there was the third group was kept in reserve at Leatherneck.
Yep.
And they kind of went out here and there with they thought they might be needed, and they never was. It was only the group that was at Marja that really saw anything.
Yeah, Marja was a shit show in 2010, all of 2010. We did the invasion, and we were out by the time you got there, because I want to say it was August, either August or I want to say it was August that I left.
Supposedly, when we got there, everything was combat operations had ended, but there was still stuff going up there in the north. But
for sure,
Delaram was cool. I think Dwyer was it Dwyer? Or was it or Dyer?
Dwyer.
Yep. They were. That was one of the places the group from Leatherneck went, and then they wound up actually packing up and going back to Leatherneck. I think the Army took over at that point. Anyway, there was really only up north, where near the dam, there was still some stuff going on that the other guys got involved with, but we didn't.
Sure. Yeah, I think that, and I don't know this to be 100% fact, but I'm almost certain that all of our Trauma 1 guys that got lifted out of Marja during the invasion went straight to Leatherneck, and if they didn't go to Leatherneck, they went to Dwyer, and there was something at Dwyer.
Yeah.
Because we staged in Dwyer, and we heloed in out of Leatherneck because there were more resources at Leatherneck, a bigger field. So I think at the time most of the stuff was going straight over there.
Yeah, it was, and while we were at Delaram, there were a couple things that we thought we might get some casualties, and they wound up just going straight. At Leatherneck was actually a British. It was actually British. The British show was Bastion.
Bastion. Yep, that's right.
And they were actually staffed with a couple of a few Navy people, but it was mainly a British show, and so they were they were kind of like what I'd been involved with in Iraq. It was just, it was, their surgical capabilities weren't a whole lot more, but they just were bigger and more robust. And the distances were it was short enough that you could get them to Leatherneck within that hour, as opposed to in Iraq where everything was more spread out.
Sure.
And you needed more people around to get into that golden hour flight time.
Gotcha. Now, you said that, your entire 20 plus years at this point leading up, led up to this 6-month, stint, where you were, before where you were taking care of these guys, and now, again, where you're in an area to take care of these guys. Do you feel like you were prepared, as best you could have been to make a difference in those situations?
So yeah, I do. But again, it kind of goes back to my training, my residency. I know that there was a lot of, and especially reservists, but there was a lot of people that got sent on deployment who felt that they weren't ready, weren't trained. And I think it goes back to I think the training in residency changed a little bit so that it was not as much generic surgery, so that you felt, I felt comfortable dealing with any part of the body, especially with injuries. I might not feel quite as comfortable if you come to me with some neck thing for an elective surgery, whereas, with trauma, I feel like I can get in and tie something off or stop the bleeding or stop whatever, and then get you back to where the definitive care takes place. I always felt comfortable with that from my training. I always made the joke that a lot of times we'd go pre-deployment training, which most of my deployments I didn't have any pre-deployment training, but I always said I didn't need it. I said, as a surgeon, if you show me where to operate, where to eat, and where to sleep, I'm good to go.
You're all set. Yeah.
I'm all set. But a lot of the younger generation with the residents, as they come out of residency now, they're not quite, the training's not the same. And even in my generation, the people that trained in civilian programs, I suspect, there's not quite that amount of training that gives them the comfort to go do what they need to do. And again, the Marines and the Navy, and the DoD for that matter, is addressing that. They're trying to come up with plans like Lejeune now is a trauma center.
Yep.
It's a level 3, but just that amount of trauma, that's what I did for the 2-3 years after I retired. That's why I was there, is because they needed more surgeons because of the trauma center. And I could see that just that amount, even though they're not war wounds, and not many gunshot wounds. Most of the stuff they see is blunt. It's still just dealing with an injured patient.
Yep.
And being comfortable with taking care of somebody that's injured and what you got to do to take care of them. That training goes a long way towards dealing with the war wounds. But they're also looking into cooperative agreements with civilian trauma centers, where they're talking about sending surgical teams to their duty station being a civilian trauma place, and where they will work there for a year, and then they'll be sent out on deployments.
Sure.
So
do you think it's going to work better? Do you think it's going to prepare them better?
It definitely, I really think that the level 3 trauma center is perfect for what we need. Unfortunately, the Lejeune is unique, at least as far as the Navy goes. I don't know anything about the Army and the Air Force, where they are or anything, but in the Navy system, Lejeune's unique because it's in an area where there is no civilian trauma centers nearby. So by providing we're providing a service without stepping on anybody's toes or without getting in the way. I mean, it makes no sense. Like for San Diego, you know, or even Norfolk, there's a level 1 civilian trauma center there. So it makes no sense to put another trauma center there just for Navy training,
Tracking.
because it's just going to get in the way.
Yep.
So Lejeune is unique that way, and that the civilians are very supportive because we are providing a service to the civilians they don't have, and it is providing training and experience to the guys that are working.
Now, so Onslow Memorial is not a level 1 trauma center, but isn't the closest is Pitt, or is it?
So the closest level 1, and I think the closest level 1 is Raleigh.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It may be Vidin up in at Eastern Virginia. Or
Yeah.
Not Eastern Carolina.
Yeah, Vidin. Yeah.
Vidin. I think they are level 1.
I think you're right.
It's important. So what the different levels in the civilian world are. So a level 1 trauma center is the big trauma center. It's got every surgical capability you could want, and they are also a research center. So they're doing studies and doing research and whatever. The level 2 is pretty much the same, except they don't do the level of research.
Okay.
They have pretty much all of the same capabilities. And level 2, Wilmington's a level 2. Now I've heard that they're trying to become a level 1, but I'm not sure whether that's going to happen or not. But they're a level 2, and of course Raleigh, North Carolina, and Duke, they are level 1s. So you had this, you know, basically a triangle with Jacksonville in the middle, and it's more than an hour to all those places. And because we became as a level 3, so a level 3, which is what Lejeune is it doesn't have neurosurgical capabilities and it doesn't have vascular capabilities.
Okay.
And in reality, that level 3 is the same as the role 2 in combat. Okay, and so that's pretty much what we need to train for, is because yes, there are going to be the surgical subspecialists that are going to be sitting back in the rear receiving all these casualties, and they're going to be doing definitive care. Where the rubber meets the road in the role 2, that's exactly what a level 3 is doing in the civilian world.
Check.
And so during my time involved with that, it was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what the Navy needs for training for their surgeons. But like I said, it's a unique situation. They can't do that in Portsmouth. I mean, Portsmouth is trying to become a level 2, but in the meantime, right across the river is Eastern Virginia level 1. And they are like wanting nothing to do with us being a level 2. And they're basically saying that they're not going to provide any kind of support right now. The Navy residents, that's where I got my trauma training in residency, was at EVMS. They're saying, hey, if you insist on doing this, we're not going to train your residents anymore. So, and I'm sure there's similar kind of parochial, territorial.
Is that about money?
It's partly about money.
Yeah.
I assume it's partly about, you've got to there's a certain volume you need to maintain your status, both in training and experience. And so that's probably part of it. I'm not sure how it would, the military there would fit into the overall state, because all of the states now have a trauma system of some sort or another. So, with Lejeune, when they became a trauma center, they got certified both by the American College of Surgeons, who is basically oversees trauma in America, but also there's a state trauma commission, state trauma board, who they had to get approval and get certified through them as well.
Sure.
And again, like I said, they were happy to have us because we weren't stepping on any toes. We were providing a service, and basically we're helping the level 2s and 1s by stabilizing patients.
Yep.
Getting instead of and even though they're bigger, sometimes they get overwhelmed with patients anyway. So we're taking those patients off their hands, the ones that made, like the car wreck that doesn't really need surgery, but we need to watch them.
Mm-hmm.
So we watch them, for 24 hours or whatever, take care of their minor injuries. That keeps the big guys from having to take care of those. So,
yeah.
So at least from everything that I could see, we were very welcomed into the system here in North Carolina.
Sure.
But I'm not hearing that that's happening anywhere else.
Gotcha.
At least in the said Army and the Air Force. And now Fort Bragg, or whatever the new name is going to be, they are working on, if they may have gotten there already, they're working on starting a trauma center. But again, they're off on their own, so they're not going to be interfering with anybody else as well. So there may be, a lot of Army bases are out in the middle of nowhere, so they can probably do a trauma center without a big problem. Whereas most Navy bases are in big city ports.
Yep.
Where they have already have trauma and big medical capabilities. So.
Gotcha. So, gosh, we've been going for a couple of hours. What did I miss?
Oh, not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot. I tell you what, I've learned a lot. I've never had a doctor come on and kind of lay it down yet. You're the first one, so it's definitely, there's some acronyms there and some stuff I'm going to do some research on now. But
you can text me if you need me to explain anything. When I came back on active duty, my plan was to spend my 9 more years and then get out, and I wound up actually doing 16. So my total time was 27. So that's, how much. And, and since then, like I told you, I've retired. I send out there to everybody, hey man, when you can retire. I recommend it.
Highly recommend.
I don't understand these people that could retire and keep on working because life's too short, man.
You retired at 06?
What we've seen, but what's that?
What, you retired at 06?
Yeah.
06,
yeah, I was actually spent more time as an 06 than everything else combined.
Wow.
I was an 06 for 16 years and everything else for 11 years.
Get some.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
Ken Sample, everybody. Ken, I greatly appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time out to, give us a view from at least myself and, I'm sure others, give us a view from the other side of the bush there. Guys that, in my community coming up, we were putting people in those situations to go see people like you, and then had to send our buddies, to guys like you and your team. And on behalf of me and all of my guys, I can at least say thank you for what you do. 27 years worth of giving back and saving life is nothing to shrug off or look at in any way other than exceptional, in my opinion. So I'm glad we met. I'm glad we got to lay this down, and hopefully this knowledge, bringing some of this knowledge out to the Navy, Marine community, Army communities, and doctor communities can be eye-opening and maybe humbling to some of them. And maybe, if you're a young doctor right now in your residency and you're hating it, and you're thinking about, your next, the next day that comes up that you're done with your residency and you're keeping account, maybe this can help you stay the course and realize that maybe there is reasons for the way that you're trained and the way that, those first couple of years go. So again, Ken, thank you so much. Ken Sample, everybody. Choices, not chances. Until next time.
Well, that concludes this episode. Thanks for listening to Choices Not Chances podcast. Please share, like, and subscribe wherever you listen or watch our podcast. You can also follow us on social media at Choices Not Chances podcast. Thanks, and have a great day.
Louisiana Gun Shop. your firearm headquarters, specializing in concealed carry guns, ammo, and training. You can get your Louisiana permit with us. Also a large selection of AR-15s, or if you are that build-it-yourself type of guy or gal, we have all the parts to build and customize your own AR-15. Glock, SIG, Taurus, Ruger. We have all the brands, both in the store or at LouisianaGunshop.com.
Not too far. You're marking the building. Hit him. Yeah, that's good.
That's a good shot. That's money. Yeah.